I was reading about why my USB keeps jacking up. So we'll pick it right up on Matthew 22. All right, the parable of the wedding feast. And again, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son, and sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. Again, he sent other servants, saying, 'Tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast.' But they paid no attention and went off, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. The king was angry, and he sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find.' And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. But then the king came in to look at the guests. He saw there a man who had no wedding garment, and he said to him, 'Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment?' And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, 'Bind him hand and foot, and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen.'" Dang. What does that mean? Seems harsh. He invited him and then he threw him out. So surely that means something. Explain Matthew 22, 1 through 14. In Matthew 22, 1 through 14, Jesus tells the parable of the wedding feast. It is a layered story that moves from an invitation to a tragedy, and finally to a stern warning about the nature of faith. Here's a breakdown of the passage and its deeper meaning. The rejected invitation. The story begins with a king, representing God, preparing a wedding feast for his son, Jesus. He sends servants to call those who were already invited, representing the religious leaders and the nation of Israel, but they refuse to come. Some are indifferent, going back to their farms and businesses. Others are hostile, seizing and killing the king's messengers, representing the prophets and the apostles. The king is furious and destroys those murderers and their city. Historically, many see this as a reference to the impending destruction of Jerusalem. The open invitation. Since the original guests proved unworthy, the king expands the invitation to everyone, the good and the bad, found in the main roads. This represents the gospel being preached to the Gentiles and the outcast. It emphasizes that the kingdom of heaven is no longer restricted by lineage. It is open to all who respond to the call. The man without a wedding garment. This is the most difficult part of the parable. The king spots a guest not wearing wedding clothes and has him cast into the outer darkness. In that culture, a king would often provide appropriate attire for his guest. To refuse the garment was to insult the host and insist on one's own terms. That changes things. It's not enough to just show up. The wedding garment represents the righteousness of Christ. You cannot enter the kingdom based on your own merits or on your own terms. You must be clothed. You must be clothed by God. The key takeaway: many are called, but few are chosen. The passage ends with this famous, sobering line. It distinguishes between the general call, the invitation sent to everyone, and the effectual choice, those who actually respond with faith and submit to God's requirements. A note on context: this parable is the third in a series of confrontations Jesus had with the Pharisees in the temple. He was essentially telling them, the door is open, but if you refuse to enter or try to enter on your own authority, you will be left outside. So this is interesting for a few. What's a question I have here? Was it by design that the Jews would deny Jesus so all could be saved by Jesus, or had they accepted him, would only the Jews have had access to salvation? This is one of the most profound what-if questions in Christian theology. It touches on the tension between divine sovereignty, God's plan, and human responsibility. There are two primary ways to look at this, based on how scholars interpret the New Testament, specifically the writings of Paul and the book of Romans. The religious leaders had immediately crowned Jesus as a political king. The sacrificial death, the Lamb of God aspect, might not have happened in the way it did. The original intent perspective: had the Jewish nation accepted Jesus as the Messiah, the biblical narrative suggests that salvation would still have reached the Gentiles. It just would have happened through Israel's success rather than their failure. The light to the nations. From the very beginning, the covenant with Abraham in Genesis 12, God's promise was, in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. The Old Testament prophets, like Isaiah, frequently spoke of the Messiah making Israel a light to the nations, so that God's salvation would reach the end of the earth. Oh, okay. Well, that's heartening. The ideal scenario: if the Jews had accepted Jesus, the Great Commission would have likely started from a unified Messianic Israel, acting as a global missionary force to bring the world to God. The theological synthesis: most theologians argue that God's plan was never plan A, Jews only, versus plan B, Gentiles instead. Versus plan B, Gentiles. Instead, they believe salvation was always intended for all. God's grace was never meant to be a closed club, which tracks. The rejection was foreknown. While the Jews were responsible for their choice, God, in his infinite wisdom, integrated that choice into his plan to ensure that the sacrifice of Jesus would pay for the sins of everyone, regardless of heritage. Okay, I was just curious, but I like that summary. Verse 15. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. They were mad they got claps. They scurried off to plot on Jesus. And they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? So here they're being fake, calling him teacher, trying to entangle him in his talk, as the King James Version would put it. Verse 18, but Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax. And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to him, Whose likeness and inscription is this? They said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, Therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. This is one of the most badass things that Jesus says, I think. I'm going to save that. And let's do a breakdown on that. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Explain Matthew 22, 18 through 22. In this passage, Jesus is being cornered by an unlikely alliance, the Pharisees, who were religious traditionalists who opposed Roman rule, and the Herodians, political supporters of the Roman-backed King Herod. They try to trap him with a lose-lose question about paying taxes to Caesar. Jesus immediately calls out their malice. If he said, yes, pay the tax, the Jewish people would view him as a traitor to God. If he said, no, the Herodians would arrest him for sedition against Rome. The core logic. Jesus' response is brilliant because it moves the conversation from a political trap to a profound theological truth. The denarius bore the face of Tiberius Caesar. Since his image was on the metal, the coin belonged to his earthly jurisdiction. The human image, the unspoken half of Jesus' argument, relies on Genesis 1:27, which states that humans are created in the image of God. Yeah, that's so hardcore. The message, give the government their scrap metal, but give God your entire being. You can be a responsible citizen of an earthly nation while maintaining a primary, absolute loyalty to the kingdom of God. Dang. Yeah. That is just so cool. Okay. Verse 23. The same day Sadducees came to him who say that there is no... Wait. The same day Sadducees came to him who say that there is no resurrection, and they asked him a question, saying, Teacher... Oh, wait, I have a question. In Matthew 22:23, it states the Sadducees. What are the implications then of, well, what did mean for they just thought the old covenant would always be? The Sadducees were essentially the anti-supernaturalist aristocrats of the Jewish world during the Second Temple period. Their denial of the resurrection wasn't just a minor theological quirk. It fundamentally reshaped how they viewed God, justice, and the purpose of the law. Here's a breakdown of what the belief system actually looked like. Sola Pentateuch. I don't know how you say that. Sola Pentateuch. The 5 books of Moses. The Sadducees generally only recognize the first 5 books of the Bible, which is the Torah, as fully authoritative. Since they argued that the Torah did not explicitly mention the resurrection of the dead or an afterlife, they rejected those concepts entirely. To them, if it wasn't in the law of Moses, it wasn't part of the old covenant. Justice is for the here and now. Because they didn't believe in a future judgment or a world to come, they believed God's rewards and punishments had to happen in this life. Absolute free will. The Sadducees rejected the idea of fate or divine providence over human actions. Since there was no eternal reward or punishment waiting at the finish line, they emphasized that humans have total agency to choose good or evil and must live with the earthly consequences of those choices. Really? That's interesting that they would believe in any kind of higher law, but not believe in an afterlife or any consequence after the fact. The role of the temple. You hit on an interesting point regarding the old covenant always being. For the Sadducees, the covenant was centered on the temple cultus. Their religion was about maintaining the ritual purity of Israel and the sacrificial system today. They weren't looking forward to a messianic age or a new heavens and new earth. They were invested in the status quo because the temple was the seat of their political and economic power. Okay, so another question. So why would Jews at that time not accept any books beyond uh, the Torah? What governing body decided otherwise, I guess, is the question. The question of why the Sadducees and other Jewish groups differed on what counts as the Bible is a fascinating look into a time before the Bible was a single bound book. In the first century, the canon, I also say canon meaning the official list of inspired books, was still a work in progress. The supremacy of the Torah, for all Jews, the Torah, which is Genesis through Deuteronomy, was the undisputed foundation. It was the constitution of the nation, delivered directly by God to Moses. The Sadducees were theological conservatives. Their argument was simple. They believed only the laws given to Moses on Sinai were binding. Silence equals absence. Since the Torah doesn't explicitly mention the resurrection of the dead, the soul's immortality, or a complex hierarchy of angels, the Sadducees argued that these were modern inventions. Socio-political status. The Sadducees were the priestly aristocracy. Their power came from the temple, and the temple's authority was rooted strictly in the Torah. They had a vested interest in keeping the rule book limited to the document that gave them their jobs. Okay, well, I guess that says enough. Yeah, we can leave it there. Okay, so yeah, we can leave it there. Okay, so verse 24 or verse 23. The same day Sadducees came to him who say there is no resurrection, and they asked him a question, saying, "Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother." Really? Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. So too the second and third, down to the 7th. After them all, the women died. Dang. In the resurrection, therefore, of the 7, whose wife will she be? So she married the first brother, he died, and then all the brothers died, and then she died. And then they ask, of the 7, whose wife will she be in the resurrection? For they all had her. But Jesus answered them, "You are wrong, because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living." And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. Dang, okay, so let's explain that. Explain Matthew 22, 29 through 32. In this passage, Jesus is responding to the Sadducees, a religious group that did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. They had just posed a gotcha question about a woman who married 7 brothers in succession, asking whose wife she would be in the afterlife, which of course is already a false pretense because they don't believe in the afterlife, as we just learned. Jesus' response is a masterclass in addressing both the logic and the theology of his critics. The twofold error being, but Jesus answered them, "You are wrong, because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God." Jesus identifies 2 reasons for their misunderstanding. Ignorance of the scripture, they read the words but miss the deeper revelation of God's nature. Number 2, ignorance of power. They assume that if there is an afterlife, it must be a mere rerun of earthly life. They underestimated God's ability to create a completely new state of existence, new state of being. Jesus clarifies the resurrection isn't just life 2.0. The comparison, like angels, humans will no longer be bound by the biological or social necessity of marriage, which in a biblical context is largely for procreation and companionship in a mortal world. This is what's so crazy to me is, I mean, obviously, I mean, they just said it. It's like as humans, we can't, I mean, we can imagine, sure, but we just can't know what it's going to be like, which I think is proportionate to the amount of faith that we're asked to have in exchange for salvation. But it's just so wild to think that, I mean, we just don't know, but it could be that we might be able to carry forward our memories. Whether we would want to or not is debatable. Probably, some people might want to do that. Some people would be totally fine with a reboot, just a whole new life. But either way, it's wild to me that we're just going to be these, like, not even a different species. See, that's another human thing. Like, totally just different beings entirely. It's really strange to think about. Really, like, you think about think about comic books or the wildest story ever told in Hollywood, and like, this is just well beyond that, and it's real. It's really mind-bending. The insight, relationship with God becomes the central, all-consuming reality, making the earthly institution of marriage unnecessary. Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, I love my wife dearly, but, well, I mean, there's no but I mean, I won't know her. Maybe I won't. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. Maybe we'll know each other, but that bond, the same bond that we have now, will be irrelevant, and that'll be okay. It's really crazy to think about. Oh, okay, they go on. The argument from the burning bush. This is the mic drop moment. The Sadducees only accepted the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, as authoritative. Jesus meets them on their own turf by quoting Exodus 3 and 6, the verb tense. When God spoke to Moses at the burning bush, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had been dead for centuries. Yet God did not say, I was their God. He said, I am their God. The conclusion, if God maintains a present tense relationship with the patriarchs, they must be alive in his presence. God does not preside over a graveyard. He is the king of the living. Which is also interesting because we talked about this, I think, yesterday or maybe the day before, but this concept of people who are saved do not die. We don't experience death. There's a transition. I mean, the physical body dies, sure, but yeah, it just speaks to a lot of underlying concepts of that power of Christianity, which I think is so cool. And really, this notion that we ourselves are not our bodies. Our physical bodies are but an aspect of our true being, which I think is our soul. Okay, verse 34. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. And a second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Okay. Verse 41. Now while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them a question, saying, what do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? They said to him, the son of David. He said to them, how is it then that David, in the Spirit, calls him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. If then David calls him Lord, how is he his son?" And no one was able to answer him a word, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. So this is also interesting because in other parts of the Bible, maybe he doesn't accept it directly, but many people refer to Jesus as the son of David, and he doesn't seem to take any issue with it. So I'm going to ask about that. Explain Matthew 22, 41 through 45. Why does Jesus take... I don't know if taking issue is the right word choice here, but I think it'll catch my meaning. Take issue with being called son of David here when other places in the Bible he is referred to as the same title without correcting anybody. Okay, I misconceived this. It is a common misconception that Jesus is rejecting the title Son of David in this passage. In reality, he isn't saying the title is wrong. He's pointing out that it is incomplete. That's a better way to put it. To understand why Jesus brings this up in Matthew 22, we have to look at the specific theological trap he is setting for the Pharisees. The context, a question of identity. By this point in Matthew, Jesus has already accepted the title Son of David multiple times from the blind men in Matthew 20 and the crowds during the triumphal entry. The Pharisees, however, had a very specific earthly view of what the Son of David would be, a human political liberator who would kick out the Romans and restore Israel's national glory. Okay. I did not know that. Jesus uses Psalm 110 and 110:1 to challenge their narrow definition. Psalm 110 reads, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet." The logic of the argument: in Jewish culture of the time, a father was always superior to his son. It would be unthinkable for a great patriarch like David to call his own descendant Lord. Here's the breakdown. The author, David, wrote this psalm inspired by the Spirit, obviously long before Jesus came along. The subjects, the Lord, Yahweh, is speaking to my Lord, the Messiah. The conflict: if the Messiah is only David's human son, David would never call him Lord. Okay. The conclusion: therefore, the Messiah must be something much greater than a mere human descendant. He must be divine. Okay. Well, that answers both questions for me. And that's right at 30 minutes. So we will wrap it up there, folks. That's right at the end of Matthew 22. So we'll start with Matthew 23 tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to drop a sub. Love you guys. God bless. And